Overall, over the entire border, illegal crossings have decreased more than 85% over the past year in the state of Texas. That said, Allie, something that you probably are aware of, and that is there are caravans or groups of people who are moving up through the Darien Gap, working their way up toward the United States. It could be around election time. It could be after the election time. All I know is this: in Texas, we will be vigilant, constantly prepared. If there are people coming our way, we want them to know something. You're not allowed to cross illegally in the state of Texas. We got barriers, we got National Guard, we have DPS officers. We're going to use every tool we can to make sure no one enters Texas illegally.
Any unconventional tools that you're going to be pulling out that we haven't seen yet? We know that you're tripling down on razor wire and barriers. I know the wall's almost done here in Del Rio. Pepper balls are being used by National Guard. Is there any other kind of unconventional, if you will, methods or tactics that you guys are going to be deploying soon?
So I got to tell you what we have found is that the National Guard laying down hundreds of miles of razor wire, standing behind that with pepper balls, that's proven to be very effective. Another tool, however, Allie, that we expect to be expanding upon, as you may be aware, the Fifth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals just ruled that Texas is fully allowed legally to use those buoys in the river. Those buoys cost 1/10 of the cost of the border wall. And so you can expect to see an increase of the buoys in the Rio Grande River.
How soon can we expect to see that?
We're going to wait until after a final decision from the court that has to enforce what the Fifth Circuit told them to enforce before we make that investment. But I would say probably in the next couple of months.
Awesome. Okay. Now, when it comes to the people coming across, we know that terrorists are coming across our border too. We've seen the numbers go up. We've reported on bolos for Palestinian men who they're waiting to cross the Texas border. What would you do? What would you want to see be done when it comes to stopping those individuals from coming, right? Though they're coming in evading, they're not coming in and self-surrendering. What can you do and what do you want to see done? And how can we reassure America that Texas is holding the line when it comes to something like that, where these individuals are trying to evade?
Right. Well, this is pretty easy. The people have the information about whether or not they're on the terrorist watch list are the federal officers. And the deal is on November the 5th, all this can be fixed overnight by having a president who will deny entry to these immigrants who are on the terrorist watch list. But first of all, just check into it. It's astounding that Kamala Harris, who's in charge of the border operations under the Biden administration, they're not even checking the status of the terrorist watch list of people coming across the border. And after they allow them in, no one is following where they go. And so the dangers that exist in our country, identified by the FBI director himself, are so alarming. It's just astonishing that Kamala Harris is not doing a more robust job right now identifying those terrorists and removing them immediately.
Now, Governor, you yourself just said that crossings in Texas are down about 85%. Does the Biden-Harris administration get any credit for that? Or is that just the kind of methods that have been deployed under Texas that you credit for that?
Let's look at the timeline, because you will remember that Joe Biden put his so-called executive order in place where he helped to close the border in June. But if you go back and look at when border crossings began to decline, that was more than a half a year before that, back in last December. And that was after Texas had begun our accelerated operations to deny illegal entry, using the guard, using the razor wire, using the pepper ball. And so it was the robust, comprehensive approach by Texas that actually led to the decline. Biden just happened to come in and stepped and rode on our coattails.
Now, I don't know if you recall this, but we did a border special on Dan Abrams Live. It was kind of like a patrol live, and we were down the Rio Grande Valley with some of your guys. We were down there with Lieutenant Oliveras with Texas DPS, working in conjunction with Border Patrol. In just 1 hour, Governor, this was a one-off. This was not well planned. This was just a random Thursday. I think it was in May. And we had 4 interactions with illegal immigrants while we were down there with DPS. Again, none of it planned. When it comes to something like that, you hear all of that activity down there on a random Thursday when it's not supposed to be really busy down there, right? Numbers are down. What do you say to something like that? Is there more that Texas could do to stop that activity in the first place? Do you feel like Operation Lone Star is responding to that adequately in absence of the federal government? or when you see something like that, 4 interactions within an hour in the Rio Grande Valley, what does that make you think as a governor in the state of Texas?
That just shows why we continue to make the investment. So we're not static in what we're doing. We're constantly adding to what we're doing to secure the border. And that's exactly why, as we speak right now, the National Guard is building more of this border razor wire barrier with anti-climb barrier and standing behind it, guarding it down in the RGV. We built this massive military base that I think you've seen in Eagle Pass that will house 2,000 National Guard members, so we can have them right on the border so they can quickly deploy to these locations, whether it be in Eagle Pass or all the way down into the RGV. But our goal is to increase our presence on the border, increase our tools, increase the barriers on the border until we reduce illegal crossings 100%.
Now, I don't know if you saw this, but we were able to interview an agent who did not want to disclose their identity in any capacity. But this agent had made the comment and said, well, the cartel controls the border. As a Texan, as the governor of Texas, what do you say to that? What kind of fight does that kind of elicit out of you? Because I would assume that you want to say, no, the cartel is not in control. Texas is going to fight. But when someone says that and says, the cartel's controlling our border, what do you think?
They control the Mexico side of the border. And one thing the cartels have shown is they're not able to make money in Texas like they are in New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And that's why after we put up the resistance that we did, the cartels took their business to those other states. Why go through all the challenges they had to go through in Texas when they can make more money quicker going to other states?
Do you have you had any conversations about these kind of special interest migrants from Palestine coming in through the El Paso sector? Are there conversations? Have you been alerted to these kind of bolos? And what is Texas doing in response? I know that, as we mentioned, Border Patrol and ICE have the immigration authority here, but you still, Texas DPS is charging people for trespassing. Texas DPS is charging for state, border related state crimes. So what can Texas do in that regard when you're hearing those things? Hey, there's a Palestinian man that might cross in El Paso. How does Texas respond?
Listen, we use the Texas Department of Public Safety to monitor, because they have the best tools to monitor people who may be on the terrorist watch list, people who may be, let's say, special interest aliens that we want to keep an eye on. I do want to mention one thing that you talked about. You talked about the El Paso sector. Know that most of the El Paso sector is actually in New Mexico. And because of the wiring job that we did around El Paso, crossings there are few and far between. There are, however, people who cross from Mexico into New Mexico and then right over into El Paso. And that's something we have to deal with. I think you may remember there was a time that we are in the process of working to increase, where we're building a border wall, not just between Texas and Mexico, but also between Texas and New Mexico, because of those illegal crossings coming into El Paso, like you talked about.
What is the status of that? Because I'm assuming you're talking about where the wall ends there in Santa Teresa, where the cartel hangs out on the wall, like literally on a bluff, waving at you, mocking you. I'm assuming it's that area. What is the progress of kind of giving yourself a barrier between El Paso and New Mexico? Because you're exactly right. Thank you for making that point about the sector.
Exactly. And so we want to wire that shut, like we have, for example, in Eagle Pass, so that it will make it incapable for them to bring people in to Texas from New Mexico. Allie, we got to, however, understand the context of all this. Let's assume Texas does succeed in reducing illegal immigration 100% into our state, which is our goal. All those terrorists, all those murderers, all those rapists, they're just going to go through New Mexico and Arizona and California. We've solved the Texas problem, but not the United States problem. That requires a new president to make sure that we are actually going to secure our border.
So what would you say to those Americans, right? Because we know that immigration is one of the top issues for a lot of voters. It's right up there with the economy. But you hear so many people go, what are you talking about? There's a problem at the border. I don't live at the border. This doesn't impact me. What would you say to those voters who say, we don't live at the border? We have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, there's actually a whole lot of people in New York talking about it. There are people like Mayor Bowser in Washington, D.C. talking about it. Mayor Johnson in Chicago talking about it. Mayor in Denver, and so many other sanctuary cities across the country. who now have to deal and grapple with an issue that used to be a Texas issue, now is a United States issue. Allie, as you talked about, uh, immigration and border security is either the number one or number two issue in the United States, whether you're in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Iowa, or Texas. It is a big time issue. Also, let me add this. So it's also an issue involving inflation. You got people here who are competing against Americans for housing, driving up the cost of housing. They may be taking jobs from Americans, and so they're losing a paycheck and paying more for the rent. It's something that's angering a lot of middle class and low income Americans who may be voting Republican this time because they're so angry about the Harris open border policies.
What about the busing of the migrants? I know there were some conversations about the DNC and you were going to bring all these people to Chicago. Do you guys even have the migrants to bus out right now? I mean, I know Texas, like you said, your goal is to get it to zero. I know it's not at zero. It is much lower. But do you even have a need to bus people out of the state anymore?
So for about the past 2 months almost, the crossings have been down so much, we haven't had the volume of people to actually bus to other locations. But remember what I said earlier. I said we're fully expecting to see a higher volume coming our way sometime in the coming months. And so we stand ready and prepared to start the busing operations again if people make the mistake of coming into the state of Texas. Our goal, however, is not to have to bus anybody because we want to deter anybody from even coming into the state of Texas.
Now, Governor, you mentioned getting it down to zero, zero crossings. Is that what a closed border for Texas looks like? Is that what you consider? And when you hear President Trump say, we need a closed border, we need to secure the border, is that what you consider a closed border? And how do you get around some of these private properties and things like, I know there are some in Del Rio where you can't put up a wall. How do you get through that and get it down to that zero crossings like you're talking about?
Well, so you really just mentioned the one hindrance to us achieving a total secure border. And that is that in Texas, there are so many private property owners on the border itself that we've not been able to get to cooperate with us. And those are places that are basically crevices where some illegal immigrants are able to get through. We continue to work with those property owners and we're winning more and more of them over. And our goal is to win all of them over to make sure we are able to seal the border.
Do you think that's feasible? Like, are you hopeful that will change, or is there just kind of like there's some people that are just so hard headed and they're not budging?
Because we've seen improvements in the relations with property owners on the border, and because when we seal off, 5 miles here, 5 miles there, and there's an opening in the middle, the person who owns the land in the middle suddenly decides, you know what? I think I want a border wall also.
Obviously, you guys put out a report or a news release today, Governor, about these non-citizens voting. There were roughly 6,500, I believe, that you identified. Over 1,900 had voting history. Now, before we get into that, does this release, does it have anything to do with the Attorney General's investigation launched last week?
So no, this release, Texas has a long history of going through voter rolls. It's something we constantly do to determine if people are ineligible to vote. What the release does note is that in 2021, I signed many more laws that made our effort even stronger to purge from the voter rolls anybody who is ineligible. And this is just the most recent report since 2021 of more than 1 million people removed from our voter rolls because they were either non-citizens, they had died, they had moved out of the state, or for some other reason.
Now, Governor, a lot of people will say, this is minuscule. This is 0.001% of, non-citizens in the grand scheme of Texan voters. First, are these people voting in local or federal elections? And then second, what do you have to say to people who say this is just a fraction of the voters and this really doesn't have any weight in swinging an election one way or the other?
So a couple of things. One is that what Texas does, because unlike some other states, we have been purging illegal voters from the voter rolls every single year for years. We're better able to contain and manage this than some other states have been. That said, I think we should all agree, and that is anybody who votes illegally, that's a crime. and has to be treated like a crime. And all of these cases where non-citizens have cast a vote, they're being turned over to the Attorney General for prosecution.
Now, when it comes to Republican lawmakers, I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it as well. Representative Fluger, Representative Collins as well, both really advocating for the SAVE Act, something that passed in the House. They're advocating for the Senate to pick it up and to pass it as well. What is the need for the SAVE Act if it's already illegal to vote as a non-citizen?
Listen, we want to put on suspenders and a belt, so to speak. We want to do everything we can at every level because the reality is, one thing that has to be sacred, and that is the ballot box and the sanctity of it, but also the surety that no illegal vote has been cast. We don't want elections stolen. As you know, Ali, there's a lot of distrust in the election process. The best way to restore confidence in the election process is to show that, one, we are removing illegal voters from the rolls, and two, we're doing everything we can to prosecute illegal voters.
We've done several reports now, Governor, and we've talked with your office as well about National Guard soldiers being involved in human smuggling. We know one of them over the last three instances since April was with OLS. How do you get the cartel to stop recruiting our soldiers, our youth? How do you infiltrate that? How do you stop them from pulling these people into this criminal act that, of course, your office is going against hard, wants a 10-year minimum for these individuals? So how do you stop them from being recruited in the first place?
Well, so one thing you just pointed out, which is a strong tool that we will deploy, and that is I signed a law that makes it a mandatory minimum of 10 years behind bars for anybody who assists with regard to smuggling illegal immigrants. And so there's a real punishment in Texas because you may think you may get paid a little bit of money from the cartels, but you're going to wind up behind bars for 10 years. And that's just not worth the price. Point one, point two, we will very aggressively enforce the law, but we'll work to educate Texans that this is the wrong thing to do and work to try to put an end to it. Again, our goal is to make the cartels continue to lose money whenever they try to have crossings into Texas.
Are there conversations being had in schools and things like that? Some of these guys, they're being recruited by their friends in school settings, things like that. Is there messaging getting out on a wider range than just you and I chatting right now?
Oh, no, there's a lot of public messaging that we've been doing, whether it be advertising and talking publicly about the new laws that I signed, the consequences, don't help the cartels, things like that. So we're constantly involved in the messaging process because there's no reason why someone should commit a crime that's, for one, bad for their own state, but for two, that's going to land them in jail.
So how does what Texas is doing help America?
So for one, it helps America because what we've done has led to a dramatic reduction in illegal entry into the United States. It's standing up for the rule of law. Anyone who stands up for the rule of law is helping America. On the busing operations, first, my job is governor of Texas, and my job is to help the communities in Texas. You talked about Del Rio earlier. Listen, the way the busing operations began is the Biden and Harris administration, they were dropping migrants off in little towns like Del Rio that had no ability whatsoever to deal with those migrants. And I said, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to send them out of here. And also because Kamala Harris would not come to the border, I decided I would take the border to her and drop them off at the residence of the vice president of the United States. It changed political discourse across America. It opened eyes of people across America. And now we have an entire country saying, whoever's going to be president, you better secure the border. So much so, Ali, you may have even noticed yesterday, Kamala Harris was running a TV ad talking about being strong on the border, showing the wall put up by Donald Trump. An amazing thing to do, but it shows how powerful it is now to take a position to secure the border.